Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my MSI plans Day 1 overview and analysis. Really excited to jump into this. MSI is upon us. We got our first two series of the tournament here, our first two series of plans. Of course, plans is actually pretty stacked this year. We have a lot of really good teams playing in it, and so not a lot of pushovers. All of these series are going to matter. If you want to know my thoughts on how I think all of these series are going to go down, as well as a power ranking of every single team at this tournament, as well as every single player at this tournament, you can check that video out up in the iCard right now. That came out yesterday. It's going to give you some good, ideas of what I feel about these teams going into not only the matchups today, but the tournament as a whole. And obviously, I give my predictions on both of the series that happened today. But in this video today, we're going to be going over the two series that just ended. I'm going to try to get these out as quickly as possible, hopefully only a couple hours after these series end, and I really hope you guys are excited. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below, and of course, let me know not only what you thought of the series, but what did you think was going to happen in the series, and did it live up to your expectations? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback down below, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the analysis, and we're going to be doing series by series. If you guys have followed my channel, if you know my playoff coverage, you're going to be familiar with the format. We're going to be going game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that both teams were able to generate, and we're going to kick it off with the series that kicked off MSI, and that's going to be a matchup between the number 1 seed out of the PCS in PSG Talon and the number 1 seed out of the LJL in Detonation FocusMe. A really intriguing matchup on paper. If you did watch my preview video, though, you will know I'm a little bit lower on DFM, just overall as a team. I think that they are one of the weaker teams at the tournament as a whole, and I'm actually pretty high on PSG Talon. They were one of my picks to get out of plans, and so I very much expect this to go one way in particular, and that's PSG being able to take the win. But as we all know, DFM is never an easy out. They've got a lot of question marks for me. I think their solo lanes have been a little disappointing in terms of what I watched in 2023, but Utapon and Harp are a very good bot lane, and Steel is pretty consistent in the jungle. As for PSG Talon, one of the more consistent teams in the entirety of plans. They like to play a little bit of a slower style. They like to get to that late game, and they like to let Yubao and Wacko, sorry, I said it wrong in the previous video as I learned from the commentators. They like to let those two players really take over in the late game because they know their team fighting is just better. I think Junji is a really good player. Aji and Woody are certainly not pushovers, and so PSG's got a lot of advantages, but DFM can maybe pressure them a little bit early, get their bot lane online and try to, control the mid game. I think that could be a viable strategy for them. But of course, my pick here was PSG Talon. Of course, every series in the first round is a best of 3, so not a ton of room to kind of lose game number 1. This is a super important game 1 for both teams. And, obviously we're going to go game by game, and I think both of them are really going to want to step up and win that first game of MSI to get on the board. But who's going to be able to do it? Well, the winner of game number 1 was PSG Talon. They are able to take the first game of the tournament. They're able to take the first game of the series here, and they're able to go up 1-0, and I'm not particularly surprised. A lot of really, really classic picks here. I hate to say that the meta has not changed at all, but the meta really has not changed at all. I talked about that in my meta report video that came out a couple of days ago, but PSG really has a good grasp on this meta, and I think they did a really good job being able to generate their lead in the early game and then just never really letting it go. This is the kind of game that DFM can't really allow to happen. They're not going to be able to come back, in my opinion, against a team like PSG Talon. They need to be able to generate an early lead and then hopefully be able to scale that into the late game. If you're kind of relying on DFM to out-team fight PSG, I think that's a really not successful way to win this series. I just don't think that's going to work. PSG is just the much better team fighting team, as we kind of saw in this game. But, credit to PSG, they also had a really good early game. What ended up happening? Well, the early game was relatively slow, not a lot of action up until 9 minutes, where the big fight over First Herald ended up taking place. PSG picks up pretty big win here. Yubao plays really, really well in the mid lane on the Ahri in that fight, and so does Junjia on the Vi to be able to create a lot of chaos. Woody roaming up had a nice game on the Nautilus and a nice fight on the Nautilus. It ends up being a 3-for-1 in favor of PSG, and that's the lead that they needed. From that point onwards, it was basically untouchable for DFM so long as PSG didn't mess up incredibly. A couple of really nice plays across the map. Tol2 gets Dove in the top lane for a kill, and then They do try to make a play, DFM that is, try to make a play on Wacko in the mid lane, and they're just not able to do it. He outplays him, is able to pick up a kill on Harp, and it just feels like everything is going in favor of PSG. Now, they do pull something back, DFM that is, pull something back in the mid game, which is Junjie being slightly overextended. He gets caught out in the enemy jungle, he gets killed, and they're able to pick up one on Woody as well. And then DFM feel like they're going to try to pressure that mid lane. They're going to try and take advantage of this big momentum spike that they got, but unfortunately, they completely screw up the team fight, and they end up getting, I think, like 4 for 0'd in that exchange, and pretty much any hope that they had at that point was just absolutely destroyed. It becomes like a 8K gold lead at that point in the game for PSG, and then they just go on to win every single fight. Yubao gets a quadra kill at the dragon fight, and then, Tol2 goes for a flank at the end of the game and absolutely whiffs on everybody, and just, not a very good game from the Malphite. We'll get into that in a little bit, but PSG basically controlling the early game, kind of giving over a little bit of pressure in the mid game, but just being better by the time they hit that point, so that even the pressure that they gave over was pretty quickly brought back for the team. And so a lot of good coming out here from PSG. My player of the game is going to go to Yubao in the mid lane. I was really hyping him up in my player rankings video. Uniboy has never really been someone that I've been, like, crazy high on. I've liked him as a player, and obviously I don't think he's a pushover by any means, but the tape that I watched from him in the PCS this year, it's the best that he's ever looked. I said that in my player rankings video, and I was really hoping that that form was going to translate over here to MSI, and so far in game number 1, absolutely it did. His Ahri was sensational, he was super aggressive, he was landing charms, he was dealing a ridiculous amount of damage, just a really fun game overall from him in the mid lane on this Ahri, and if he's going to be able to perform like this the whole tournament, my pick of PSG being able to make it out of groups, or make it out of play-ins, I should say, is certainly not outlandish. I mean, he is truly someone that is good enough to carry, especially when you add on the kind of pressure that players like Junjie and players like Wacko actively added to the team in this game. Junjie was spectacular. Outside of that one time he got caught, he was basically perfect this entire game. His team fighting is great. His initiations is great. His initiations are great. And his peel is really good. I think that's probably one of his more, consistent traits, especially going back and watching EDG Junjie, is that his ability to peel enemies off of his carries is just, he has a better sense for when to stay back than I think a lot of other junglers do. And he does it at a really high level. Ashi was really good in this game on the Cassante, a lot of really good engages, good ultimates. Wacko was doing a lot of damage, and, he had the peel, he had the time on the Aphelios, and then Woody was fine on the Nautilus. Not really all that notable, not really any major hooks, but still was pretty good. But overall, I would definitely say this was a mid-lane focused game that kind of translated into Wacko and Aji being really strong in the late game with Junjie kind of facilitating it all. But for DFM on the other side, not exactly the best showing that you could have asked for in your first international game of the year, but I hate to say it, this is pretty much exactly what I predicted. Tol2 is going to get my dud of the game because he just was not very good. I mean, missing Malphite ults multiple times, being picked off in the top lane, not being useful in team fights. It just wasn't a very good game from him, and you have to wonder if it's nerves. This is his first international event ever. It was his first split in the LJL in any, upper region ever, which is definitely a tall task for a team like DFM, who pretty consistently wants to be playing at an international level, but he did not hold up in game number 1, and that's going to be a really interesting thread, I think, for the rest of this tournament, is if he can't hold up, if he continues to be a little bit of a weak point for DFM, they're going to struggle to win games, and that's definitely going to be a little bit concerning, but he was far from the only one who was bad in this game. I thought Harp wasn't particularly good on the Thresh, getting caught out, just being way too aggro with those hooks. Arya did negative damage on the Annie. That was one of my big, quote-unquote, hot takes going into the tournament, is that I really don't think Arya has had a very good 2023, or at least all the games that I watched of him in playoffs just weren't all that fantastic, and he definitely got gapped by Yubao in game number 1, and then Steel and Udapon really couldn't do all that much in this game, but DFM, honestly, right now, just looks a little bit outclassed, which I can't say that I'm all that surprised by, because I did think that PSG was the better team, but you gotta hope that they're going to be able to rebound their mental and get back in it in game number 2. As for PSG, just keep the ball rolling. If you win early game, you're probably just gonna win every game in this series, because DFM just doesn't team fight well. We saw that. The Tol2 initiations were bad. Steel was just basically full disengage, and Arya was dealing no damage. They just don't team fight all that well as a unit, and if PSG is able to go into those team fights already with a lead, it's going to be pretty deadly for them. And so, is DFM going to be able to keep this series alive, or is PSG going to make quick work of this, send them down to lower bracket 2-0, and really solidify their spot in that winner's finals for a chance to get out of groups? Well, the winner of game number 2 was PSG Talon. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to close out this series with a 2-0 sweep. And they're moving on to winners finals here in Group B, and that's absolutely massive for them. Somehow, some way, they were able to win this game number 2. It looked completely doomed for them by the 20-minute mark, and, somehow, some way, they're able to come back, and, I hate to say my analysis proved to be quite spot on, but pretty much everything I said in my video that I released yesterday looked pretty freaking accurate in this game. I think if you ever wanted proof that I at the very least do watch these games and do at least a little bit know what I'm talking about, this game hopefully can prove that a little bit. DFM getting a major lead in the early game by being a pretty solid team with good experience, but they just can't close it out. PSG is a phenomenal team at being able to, keep the game close and stall. I think stalling is legitimately one of their best traits that they have, and being able to get to the late game in team fight, whereas DFM, it's just a major weakness of theirs, and it was something that I was concerned about going into the tournament, and that absolutely came to fruition in this game here. PSG is able to take it, but, DFM had this game in the palm of their hands. The fact that they lost this is pretty inexcusable, and they're certainly going to be feeling that moving into the lower bracket now. But what exactly happened? There's a lot that happened in this game, in this 50-minute long game, and so, I'm going to try and quickly get through some of the major points. I'm not going to harp on them too much. Pun not intended, considering harp is in this game, but I'm not going to harp on them too much. I'm just going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. DFM does get an early lead with a couple of really nice plays. A nice 2v2 kill in the bot lane for First Blood, where PSG just overextends. Really nice fight around Second Dragon. Just a few things back and forth that I would say give DFM pretty nice lead, about 3k gold going into kind of the early mid-game here, which is always going to be big. I said this in game number 1, you've got to be able to generate an early lead if you're DFM in this series. If you don't get that, you're basically screwed. Like, there really isn't a lot of ways to come back in this one. They do push that lead further by absolutely destroying PSG at Baron, or should I say first to Baron, and getting the objective. Unfortunately, they're not able to end off of it. They're really not even able to get all that much off of it. They are able to generate a lead that's somewhere around 10k by that point in the game, 8 to 10k, kind of back and forth, which does put them in a position where they absolutely should not be losing the game at all. But at the end of the day, not being able to end definitely came back to haunt them, because by the time we get to second Baron, PSG actually is just the better team fighting team. And even though they're down, 8, 10k gold in this game, they're actually able to basically pull off a miracle fight, be able to pick that up, and then get the Baron. And they actually get a lot off of that. They're able to not equalize the gold, but get it down to like 3 or 4k, which is massive. The difference between, 8, 9k and 3 and 4k difference is major, especially towards the back half of these games when all your carries already have like 2 or 3 items, right? Being able to make sure that, it's only a 1 item difference, like that matters by the time we hit that point in the game. So a really big miracle fight for PSG, and then they actually are able to pick up Soul off of that as well, and that's going to be massive. Chem Soul is pretty interesting, especially when you've got a Renata on the other side, and so a lot of really interesting things going on in this game, but this is really where Wacko starts completely taking over the game on this Aphelios. We can talk about how, DFM is up in gold, but Aphelios can be an item down, and as long as he's hit his power spike, he's still going to be someone that you absolutely have to get on in a fight, basically immediately, or else he is going to obliterate you, and that's what started happening. He had the perfect guns all the time. He was able to basically single-handedly win a lot of fights for PSG down the stretch. That helps them, win some fights and get back into the game, basically make the gold even, and even though they do lose the Elder Dragon, they're able to hold off and trade 1 for 1 there, and they're able to pick up the second Elder Dragon with a really good fight, and they're able to end the game off of that. And so, back and forth stuff. DFM really should not have lost this game. They were up 8, 9, 10k gold at points in this game, and they ended up losing it, but I can't really say that I'm all that surprised. We knew that DFM had a poor late game, and we knew that PSG had a really good late game. That's just kind of the two teams that they had here, and DFM just weren't able to close out the strong early game that they were able to generate for themselves. But for PSG, player of the game, no question going to be Wacko here. He was phenomenal on this Aphelios. I don't want to say single-handedly winning them the game, because there were some really good plays made by Junjia, made by Aji in this game, in particular, those two, but Wacko was just so crazily good in team fights. That fight where they were down 8, 9k gold and they were able to win it, it's because Aphelios got a 4-man ult off that just completely turned the entire tide of the game and, allowed them to pick up Baron. If he's not as good as he was in this game, they don't win. It just is is straight up that simple. He was fantastic. He's going to get my player of the game, and quite frankly, he's going to get my player of the series for how good he was in this game number 2. Obviously, Yubao was all right, but he also had some moments where he wasn't very useful in this one, and so Wacko, to me, without him, they don't win this series as easily as they did in 2 games, and so he's going to get my player of the series. He's going to get my player of the game. You got to give a big shout to Aji and Junjia as well. A couple of bad plays from Junjia, but for the most part, his team fighting towards the back half was also strong, and then Aji was a really good facilitator, initiator, and peeler for the Aphelios towards the back half of the game. Some question marks from Yubao, but, he wasn't really bad. He didn't really give over a lot of negative plays, just wasn't particularly positive in this game. And my dud of the game is actually going to stay on PSG. It's going to go to Woody on this Blitzcrank. A ton of really garbage plays coming out from this Blitzcrank, if I'm being entirely honest. Not a very good game from Woody. However, it did matter in the end because he got the one final hook at the end of the game onto Steel that ended up winning them the game, and so you can miss 1,000 if you hit the one that matters the most on Blitzcrank. It's probably going to be fine, and that's kind of what he did this game, but I do want to acknowledge that he was probably the player with the most amount of negative plays in this game. He was a big reason why DFM was able to generate that lead in the early game anyways, but credit to the rest of the team for being able to survive and kind of move into that late game and being able to take this one when they really shouldn't have. And then for DFM on the other side, not exactly how you wanted to kick off MSI. Very demoralizing loss, but, there are a couple things that I think you could point out as, successes. A really good early game. I think Arya played a lot better in this game, and Udapon and Harp, I think, both played well. Unfortunately, topside looks like it's going to be a problem, which is not a good thing. Tol2 continues to be a massive weakness for DFM. He kind of was in the LJL. I talked about this a bit in my team review, my team rankings video that came out yesterday, but Tol2 wasn't exactly someone that I was super sold on. It was more the prospect pedigree that made me give him, a rather high ranking. I heard a lot of people that I trust that talk about the LJL, talking about how good Tol2 is as a player, and I decided to defer to them, but I didn't really see it a ton on tape, and unfortunately, he's kind of following an LJL tradition, not exactly performing well in his international debut. That's kind of been the case for a lot of LJL players, is the first time they go to international events, they're not exactly the cleanest players of all time, but I really do believe that this team still has some upside. I like Udapon and Harp. I think they're very good players, and, I do think that it's going to be interesting. Depending on who they play in the lower bracket, I think there's a chance that they're going to be able to win the series, but as y'all know, if you watched my predictions video, I don't think they will. I don't have them winning a series in my predictions, and so far, it's just kind of gone a little bit according to plan, which is disappointing, but congratulations to PSG Talon. They're now moving on to winners finals. DFM definitely put in a much rougher spot, but their tournament is not over yet by any means. Both of these teams definitely still have to play for more in order to get to the spots that I think both of them want to be in, but especially for PSG Talon, this is a pretty damn good start. But now we get to move on to our second series of the day here, and this one was the one, honestly, I was looking forward to more. This matchup, regionally speaking at the very least, is always interesting. There's so much history between these two regions and fun games coming out of both of them, and so I was really excited to see it. We had the number 2 seed from the LEC in G2 Esports, taking on the number 1 seed from CBLOL in Loud. Really, really excited. EU versus Brazil always ends up being an absolute banger, whether that's going back to Alliance and Kaboom, obviously, even just as recently as last year with Loud versus Fnatic. A lot of really good games coming out of these two regions, and Brazil absolutely holds their own in most cases against Europe, but obviously they're going to be major underdogs going up against a G2 team that, while they're not exactly in the best form of all time, they are certainly one of the most talented teams in the play-in stage. Not an easy series by any means. I definitely have G2 going over in this one, even though I'm super high on Loud. I really like this team. I think they are easily the best of like the tier 2 region teams, them, DFM, and R7. I think Loud is by far the best out of those 3 teams from what I have seen. I just don't think it's going to be enough to be able to dethrone the Kings of Europe and, really make G2 struggle, because they're just one of those teams that has enough talent to be able to overcome, I think, a lot of the things that Loud does well, most notably the aggression, but like I said before, it's never an easy matchup for a European team going into a Brazilian team, and so if anybody is going to make some noise at this tournament, it's probably going to be Loud. It's probably going to get loud, if you will. The pun was definitely intended in that respect. But how did things go? Well, we're going to start it off, of course, with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They are able to take the first game of the series, but this was not a blowaway by any means. This was an incredibly close game, very back and forth from both of these teams, and Loud definitely holding their own. They actually had a lead for a good majority of this game. It wasn't a massive one, but they certainly controlled a lot of the tempo in the early and mid game, and for that, you've got to give them a lot of credit. They were not afraid in this one, and I think that's really what I wanted to see out of this team. You know they like to make a lot of these more aggressive plays. We've known that from Worlds last year, and that's definitely carried over into this year, most notably around their side lanes that they really like to enable. Robo and Route, talked about that in my player preview, and they definitely did that in this game. A lot of the, styles that I ended up talking about in that video have very much come to fruition, and Loud, I think, exemplified that. Unfortunately, G2 with some really good team fighting towards the back half of the game, some smart decisions and some mistakes coming out from Loud, quite frankly, that G2 did a good job taking advantage of and being able to close out the game from them. But what ended up happening in the game? Well, early game's actually relatively close. A lot of plays going back and forth, a lot of, 1-for-1s or 2-for-2s in favor of both teams, but Loud actually is able to generate a small lead. They're definitely the ones being the aggressors in a lot of these circumstances, diving top, diving bot, trying to create these plays, and while all of them don't go perfect, they're at the very least gaining gold off of them, and I feel like Loud really wanted to try and make these plays as concise and as early as possible. They didn't want to let G2, get that early game advantage with the comp of Darius and Nidalee and even something like Nautilus, which is going to be relatively strong in the mid game. They didn't want to let that be able to kind of hit that power spike with a gold advantage, and so they wanted to try and take advantage of that early, and I honestly think they did a pretty good job, even if BB did get really strong because of it on the Darius, a dive top lane that ends up giving him a kill. Big fight around first Herald that ends up giving him a double kill, and the Darius ends up getting really strong, which does come back to bite them. But outside of that, I do like the idea behind a lot of these plays. It was just maybe the execution that wasn't exactly perfect. But even then, I'm not going to complain too much. The mid game is really defined by wild fight after wild fight, whether it's Croc sitting in the bush bot lane just kind of waiting and actively baiting G2 into a fight in the bot lane that they probably shouldn't have taken, and Loud's able to definitely gain an advantage off of, or this insane 2v2 fight in the top lane that ends up being a 2-for-2 once Croc ends up coming in, but the power of Nautilus mid ends up getting shown off with Caps basically being able to 1v1 Tinones in that fight. Just a lot of crazy stuff going on around the map. Wild is definitely the word that I would use to kind of explain how the mid game goes, but it was the second Herald fight that ends up being the most decisive of all of them, with Loud actually being able to take it. Really good fighting here by Robo on this Renekton in the mid game, and Route on the Aphelios being able to clean up a lot of it. They're able to get the second Herald, they're able to win the fight, and they're able to generate a lead off of that, about 3k, which is pretty big for Loud going at around, 16, 17-ish minutes into the game. It's not really what a lot of people expected to happen. Loud, nice macro, nice aggression, and really being able to kind of control the pace of the game. They continue that macro quote-unquote advantage by taking advantage of G2 being separated in the mid lane, being able to pick up a few kills there, and being able to get full control of Baron to be able to continue their aggression. Unfortunately, though, this is kind of where some of their aggressive plays start to backfire for them. They go for the Baron, but it's essentially a 50-50 that they do win. Luckily, Croc is able to get the smite off, but they end up losing the fight, and there was really no reason to make this play. It was way too aggro, and Loud ends up giving over a bit of gold because of it, but you know what? They still have Baron on a couple of members. They're still going to be able to pressure, and so they go bot lane. They really want to try to pressure when they have Baron up, and they're pushing into the base. They're trying to take inhibitor in the bot lane. Unfortunately, they just overextend, and G2 ends up acing them in a fight in their own base to basically make the gold lead completely even, and from that point in the game, pretty much any lead that Loud had is kind of neutralized, and G2 is able to take advantage of that. They're able to win a fight in the top lane, they're able to push through, even the teleports on the back lane, the flanks that are able to take out Mickey aren't going to be enough because Broken Blade goes absolutely nuts. Mickey continues to find picks. His team fighting this game was exceptional, and G2 is just able to win a lot of these. They're able to get picks onto Route, they're able to get picks onto Robo, they're able to get picks onto Tinones, and there's really just not a lot that Loud can do. They kind of just have to watch their base crumble after they're a little bit of a over-aggressive calls end up costing them in the end, which has to really suck, but they definitely held their own in this game. You can't be too mad at Loud here because truly I do believe that they definitely looked competent in this game. They just couldn't quite finish it off in the mid to late game. Congrats to G2 though, hanging in there, not panicking, capitalizing on the mistakes that Loud was making, and basically taking every advantage that you could in this game after Loud was just so aggro in the early game. Being able to weather the storm and coming out on the other side on top is definitely a very good trait to see coming out of this G2 team. My player of the game is going to go to Mickey X in the support position on this Rel. Really good game from him. The team fighting was extraordinary from this Rel. Basically every ultimate was spectacular, and that's kind of what you expect out of Mickey. When you put him on a champion like Rel that can be able to create his own plays and be able to create for the rest of the team, he's going to be able to capitalize on that, and he's going to be able to make it look really good. I think some people are going to want to see this on Broken Blade, and I totally understand that. The Darius was also really big in the top lane. I do want to say that a lot of his plays were, for the most part, created by the rest of the team, and he just kind of, capitalized on them, which is good. You still have to absolutely do that on the Darius, but outside of that one fight in the top lane where he flashes in and hits all 5 with the Q, there wasn't a lot of, big flash plays coming out from the Darius, although Broken Blade still was stellar this game. I thought Yike was really good, Caps was good, Hans really wasn't doing all that much damage, but it didn't really matter. The team had enough firepower to be able to win these fights anyways, and then unfortunately for Loud on the other side, somebody has to get dead of the game, and that for me is going to be Robo. I do actually like a lot of the plays that he made in the mid game. It feels really bad for me to give him dead of the game because I think he was way, way, way better than his scoreline would entail. This was not a 2-10 Renekton in terms of, how much he actually contributed to the team. Unfortunately, the late game was miserable. This champion did absolutely nothing once Loud was behind and was much more of a detriment to the team than he was a positive, but, a lot of the lead that they were able to generate was through him. It's just unfortunate that I think he was probably the least influential. I think Seos definitely deserves an honorable shout for dead of the game because you're playing Tahm Kench, and yet G2 is getting pick after pick after pick. He just was super slow on the draw to be able to eat his teammates and keep them alive, and it's just not exactly what you want to see. It's not why you draft Tahm Kench. You want that safety, you want that security, and he really didn't offer that at all this game. It wasn't a very good game from him. I thought Croc made some decent plays, even if he did forget to buy items at level 1. I mean, that is a mistake you just cannot make at an international level. Tinone's made some good plays. He also made some bad ones. He ended up getting first blood in this game in a 2v2 mid, which I thought was good, but outside of that, not really all that useful. A couple of flashes that were a little bit errant, I will say, and then Route was fine. I thought he team fought well, but him getting caught towards the back half of the game was the reason that they ended up losing, and so you can attribute, I should say, a lot of negative plays to basically everyone on this team, and, you can attribute why they lost at least a little bit to everyone on the team. It was more of a team loss than, in my opinion, any individual player kind of running it down, and I think for Loud, that should be at least a little bit, more... I don't know, it should put you at ease, I guess is what I should say. It wasn't just, oh, one player played bad. It was, we were just a couple of decisions away from beating G2, and I think that should give you at least a little bit of confidence moving into Game 2, but you're going to need it. Obviously, best of 3, you can't lose this Game 2. You don't want to get swept out. You put up way too good of a fight in Game number 1 to get swept out, but for G2, I mean, you weathered the storm already. It's going to be very difficult for Loud to throw the same amount of pressure at you now that you know what to expect out of this team. You just got to be able to do exactly what you did in Game 1. Weather the storm, be able to get to that mid to late game where you're just better. You know you're going to make better decisions. You know you're going to be cleaner, and you're going to be able to clean up the game. If you can dominate the early game, it's going to be a no-brainer, especially with Yike pulling out things like the Nidalee and Broken Blade pulling out things like the Darius. This is a very G2 comp, and I think they executed on it well. So is G2 going to be able to close out the series in 2, or is Loud going to show that Game 1 was not a fluke and that they are actually relevant here? Well, the winner of Game number 2 was G2 Esports. They are able to take Game number 2. They're able to close out the series with another sweep, only 4 games today. And man, they're able to do it in pretty damn dominant fashion, aren't they? 20-minute game. Game 1, this was not. Close, this was not. That is definitely a good way to explain what ended up happening here. It felt like G2 took Game 1 kind of personally and ended up saying, screw it, we just want to go back to the hotel room now for Game number 2. I mean, just an utter domination. There was no pressure on the side of Loud. They got absolutely obliterated in this one, and really, it's going to be a little bit of a short analysis because there's just not a lot of analyzing to do other than me saying G2 was that much better than Loud in this game. So let's go ahead and talk about it, I guess, relatively quickly. First of all, what the hell is this draft from G2? I know we had a kind of crazy one in Game 1, but Broken Blade plays Darius, Yike plays Nidalee, Caps is kind of crazy. Poppy top lane, oh my god, like, I love it. I love to see it. It's really good into Jax. It's really good into Wukong. Hell, it's even good into, like, Tom and Lissandra. Like, you can do a lot of interesting things with Poppy here. And even though it didn't really matter all that much, like, they were super far ahead, they probably could have had anything in the top lane, it definitely ended up being a positive for them. We'll talk about that a bit later, with Broken Blade picking up a solo kill in this game onto that Jax. But essentially what happened in the early game was G2 picking up a pretty massive lead. Croc just trying to clear his jungle. He hit level 3, and then, oops, all of a sudden there's a Lulu in his jungle. It's like, whatever, dude, it's just a Lulu. I'm just gonna keep taking blue. Oh god, she's still hitting me. Oh god, she's still hitting me. Mickey X basically 1v1ing Croc at level 3 in his own jungle is one of the funniest things that I've seen at an international event in a very long time. Hansama coming in to pick up the own kill. Like, Croc has to feel so tilted after that play. I can't even imagine not buying items in game 1 and then having that play happen at the beginning of game 2. Like, your early games have just been completely doomed in both games so far today. Certainly not what you want, but even outside of that, they're just bullying Loud across the map. A 4-man top lane dive that ends up, with a kill. Pretty sad for the Jacks. Really not a lot that you can do in that scenario. And although Loud is able to pull something back with a nice play in the mid lane because Yike can't land a spear, and trust me, that was a little bit of a problem over the course of the game, even though he went 10-0-7. It never really mattered. Robo ends up getting caught in the river. Rout gets caught out bot lane with Caps making this insane hook. Just a lot of plays in the early and mid game going the way of G2 to allow them to establish what is like a 3, 4, 5k gold lead by 15 minutes into this game, which, if you know G2, they don't surrender those all that easily. And then we get what I like to consider the longest fight of all time. There really is no other way to put it. We get a fight around Second Dragon, which, okay, that's fine. Second Dragon, it's a good place to fight. Loud feel like they have to try and force a play there. It's okay. They end up not being able to make it work. They end up getting absolutely trounced, but G2 wants more. They want to end up diving Loud in the bot lane to try and complete the ace, but Robo gets there. He's able to turn the fight a little bit in favor of Loud, and G2 feels like they have to back off, but just kidding. All of a sudden, we're going back in, and, Rout overextends a little bit. He gets caught out, and then Tinones roams down to the fight, and he ends up trading 1-for-1. It ends up being, legitimately a 45-second long fight, which is pretty insane. Maybe it was even longer than that, but, this is definitely going to be the longest fight of MSI. G2 coming out on top in it, even though it's a little bit chaotic back and forth. I just kind of wanted to bring it up because it was really funny to watch in the moment, but outside of that play, there was really nothing else that Loud even turned remotely in their favor the rest of the game. Basically, G2 from that point onwards just runs it down. They're able to pick off Seos multiple times. They're able to pick off Robo. Like I said, him getting solo killed in the top lane happens at around this point, and they're able to end the game in 20 minutes, even though they really shouldn't. They have no buff. They have no anything. They're just in the base. They end up getting a pick, and they're like, screw it. We can continuously fight Loud in the base over and over again because we're up an item and a half on them. So they go and do it, and they execute on it, and they're able to end the game in 20 minutes, which is just one of the most disrespectful things that I've ever seen. And so congrats to G2. I mean, they absolutely dominated this game. Player of the game for me is going to go to Mickey. He was just so phenomenal. He's also going to be player of the series for me. He was easily, in my opinion, the best player for G2 in this series. I think Broadcast gave it to Broken Blade, which I understand. Really good Darius game in game 1. I think the Poppy was a little bit less noticeable in game number 2, but it was still really strong. I mean, the solo kill on Robo is obviously great, but Mickey, for me, was far and away the best player on G2 across this series, and there was a reason that I ranked him as the number 3, I think, support at this tournament. He's really freaking good, and he's in really good form right now, and I expect that to continue, whether that's on Engagers or whether that's on Enchanters. Hans was really good in this game, dealing a lot of damage on the Jinx. His positioning was a lot better. Yike has a great score line, but, he missed a lot of spears this game. Very Yankos-esque. Broken Blade with a good game, and then Caps. I mean, the versatility that he just offers by being Nautilus in the mid lane, and some of those hooks that he was able to land were absolutely incredible. G2 was just firing at all cylinders, no negative notes. For Loud, demoralizing. I mean, just a complete stomp. Probably one of the stompiest games we are going to see at MSI this year. Just not very good from them. Seos is going to get my dud of the game, but you could give it to Robo, you could give it to Seos, you could give it to Croc, you could give it to multiple people here. There were no good moments from Loud. I mean, they got some picks, like, Croc was able to pick up that kill onto Caps in the mid lane, and, Rout was able to get a couple kills back in that fight in the bot lane, but, I mean, those were mostly just G2 kind of limit testing plays, and outside of that, just not a lot of positives. Seos was miserable in the Tahm Kench across this entire series, across both games. It just didn't feel like he knew how that champion worked. I don't really understand going for the Aphelios Tahm Kench 2 games in a row when Thresh is on the board. He plays it, I know he does, and so it's just a very weird combo to me. Robo didn't have a particularly great series, although I think some of his struggles are going to be a little bit overblown. He wasn't good in game number 2 here, but I think his Renekton game in game 1 was, more redeemable than people give it credit for, and then Croc and Tinones were just never going to be, redeemable in this series. Like, Croc's not a carry player, and after he had miserable early games in both games, it's not exactly going to go great, and Tinones was fine, just really couldn't do all that much on the Lysandra, so Loud now moves down to the lower bracket. They're going to be facing DFM, the losers of the earlier series. This is what I predicted. I thought G2 was going to be able to go forward. They're going to need to get their confidence back, though, if they want to uphold my prediction of them being able to take down DFM. And then for G2, they move on to winners finals now to take on PSG. The winner of that will qualify for the main stage here at MSI. G2 in the form they're in look pretty darn good to be favorites for that series if they're able to keep up the momentum that they were able to show in this. I mean, they could be it could be a pretty easy path, is all I'll say, for a G2 team that is playing as good as they did in game number 2. Alright, but that is going to do it for my MSI Play-In Stage Day 1 overview and analysis. G2 and PSG moving on, Loud and DFM moving down to lower bracket. Nobody's out yet, and so it's not panic time yet, but the two teams in losers bracket definitely need to get their momentum back sooner rather than later, but I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. Like I said, let me know how you enjoyed the video, and let me know what you thought of the games as well. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot for me and for the channel and for all of us that help go into making these videos. And if you did, really enjoy it, obviously that like button really means a lot to me. It helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be covering every single day of MSI action across the entirety of the tournament. And so if you enjoyed this video, I promise you're probably going to enjoy the rest of them as well. Hit that subscribe button and hit that bell to get those daily notifications when these videos go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.